There are places in Louisiana that look completely normal until you stare at them a little too long. A road cutting through the swamp that locals say you should never stop on after dark. A small town so pretty it looks like a postcard until you realize the history underneath it is heavy enough to change the air. People sell you Louisiana through jazz, Mardi Gras, and dreamy oak-lined roads, but that is only the surface. Drive just a little off the tourist path and you run into places where water is swallowing the land. Mansions still glow with old stories and tiny communities feel like time never fully moved on. This is not surface-level creepy. These are 10 real towns, and trust me, number 1 will make you see Louisiana very differently. Number 10, Manchac does not feel like a town in the normal sense. It feels like a place the land almost forgot to finish. Up here between Lake Maurepas and Lake Pontchartrain, near LaPlace, the road cuts through water, reeds, cypress, and low gray acre like it is trespassing through something older than Louisiana itself. Even in daylight, Manchac has that uneasy look some places get when they seem half built by people and half taken back by the swamp. It is less a proper community than a tiny outpost on the edge of wet silence. The kind of place where the map looks cleaner than reality ever could. And that is exactly why the Julia Brown story never really died here. The legend most people connect to Manchac actually centers on nearby Vacherie and Ruddock, 2 tiny settlements in the same swamp belt. Julia Brown, sometimes called Aunt Julia, was said to practice folk magic. People remembered her for sitting on her porch and singing strange songs, including one that locals later claimed sounded like a warning. One day she would die, and when she did, she would take the whole town with her. That already sounds like Southern folklore doing what Southern folklore does best. But then reality stepped in and made it harder to shrug off. On September 29, 1915, a major hurricane tore through southeast Louisiana. The storm devastated communities around Lake Pontchartrain, and Ruddock and Vacherie were nearly wiped out. In the version people still whisper about, the storm hit on the very day of Julia Brown's funeral. That is the part that turns this from a campfire tale into something stickier. Because now you are not just dealing with a ghost story. You are dealing with a real disaster, real loss, and a region where myth and memory got braided together so tightly that nobody fully pulled them apart again. That might be what makes Manchac so creepy. Not the idea that the swamp is haunted, but the feeling that this landscape makes haunting seem reasonable. Water, fog, old storms, half-vanished communities, and one woman's voice still floating through local memory. Some places scare people because something happened there once. Manchac is worse. It feels like the place itself never stopped singing. Number 9. Venice feels like the kind of place you reach by accident, then realize nobody gets there by accident. Down in Plaquemines Parish and about 77 miles south of New Orleans, Louisiana Highway 23 just keeps pulling you lower and lower until the road starts to feel less like a highway and more like a dare. This is the last community on the Mississippi you can still reach by car. The place where the Great River Road runs out, and with only about 160 people, Venice does not feel like a town so much as a final stop before the map gives up. That is what makes it creepy. Not haunted house creepy, not ghost story creepy. Venice is creepy in a quieter way. It is the feeling of standing at the end of something man-made while nature keeps going. Behind you is the road, in front of you is water, marsh, river mouth, open gulf, and weather that never really asks permission. The land out here is so low it sits basically at sea level, which means nothing about this place feels fully secure. It feels borrowed. And at first, Venice does not look like a place built for fear. It looks like a place built for fishermen, boats, docks, lodges, and people chasing redfish, tuna, and the next good day on the water. That is the twist. On paper, Venice sells itself as a sportsman's paradise. In your gut, it feels like a frontier outpost clinging to the last thin strip of ground before the Gulf takes over. That uneasy feeling is not just atmosphere either. Lower Plaquemines has long been one of the most storm-vulnerable parts of Louisiana. with parish documents and federal hurricane protection work both reflecting how exposed this corridor is to storm surge and major tropical weather. Katrina devastated much of Lower Plaquemines, and Ida hit the parish hard again in 2021. So when people call Venice the end of the world, it lands a little differently once you know the place has spent years proving how fragile the edge of Louisiana can be. Maybe that is the real reason Venice sticks with people. It is not scary because something is hiding there. It is scary because nothing is hiding there. The sky is too open, the water is too close, the road is too final. And once you reach a town like this, you start to understand that some places do not need legends. Their geography already does the job. Number 8. LaPlace is the kind of place that gets under your skin for a simple reason. It does not look scary at all. Sitting in St. John the Baptist Parish between New Orleans and Baton Rouge with around 29,000 people, it looks like a regular Louisiana community. Families live here, kids go to school here, people run errands, sit in traffic, go to church, head home and do all the small ordinary things that make a town feel stable. And maybe that is what makes LaPlace so unsettling. Nothing about it looks like it should belong on a list like this. Because the thing that makes LaPlace creepy is not something you can point at. It is the air. LaPlace sits in the industrial stretch along the Mississippi River that many people know as Cancer Alley. And for years, the community has been pulled into a fight over chloroprene emissions tied to the nearby Dinka plant. EPA has said the area around the plant faced serious cancer risk concerns from that pollution, turning this into one of those stories where the fear is real precisely because it is invisible. No haunted mansion, no abandoned graveyard, no ghost in the swamp. Just a normal town. And a question nobody wants hanging over a normal town. What if the danger is something people breathe every day without seeing it? That is the part that changes LaPlace from troubling to truly eerie. The town does not feel cursed in a dramatic movie kind of way. It feels trapped in a much more modern kind of dread. Streets still look lived in, schools still open, life keeps moving. But underneath that routine is years of arguments over emissions, public health, environmental justice, and whether the people living nearby were ever really given a fair chance to feel safe. And then came the twist. In 2025, while the legal and political fight kept shifting, Dinka announced it was suspending production at the LaPlace plant. At first glance, that sounds like an ending, but it does not really play like one. Because once a place has spent years living with that kind of fear, the fear does not disappear overnight. It stays in the memory of the town. It stays in the way people talk. It stays in the way ordinary air stops feeling ordinary. Some towns on this list are creepy because of old legends. LaPlace is worse in a quieter way. It makes you realize that sometimes the most disturbing places are the ones that look completely normal until you learn what people there have been worrying about all along. And number 7. Vacherie. Vacherie is the kind of place that makes you lower your voice without really knowing why. Sitting in St. James Parish, right along the Mississippi between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, it is home to about 5,500 people, but it feels much older than a number like that can explain. This is plantation country in the purest Louisiana sense. The stretch of River Road where the scenery gets so beautiful it almost starts to feel suspicious. And nowhere captures that better than Oak Alley. At first, it looks almost too perfect. The house, built in 1839, stands at the end of that famous alley of live oaks with 28 giant trees lining the path toward the river like they were placed there by somebody obsessed with symmetry. The grass is trimmed, the columns are clean, the branches curve overhead in a way that feels less natural than theatrical. It is one of the prettiest images in Louisiana, maybe one of the prettiest in the whole South, and that is exactly where the unease begins. Because Vacherie is creepy in a way that has nothing to do with darkness and everything to do with contrast. The place is beautiful, but the beauty does not feel light. It feels heavy. Oak Alley itself describes those trees as some of the oldest and quietest historians on the property, and that lands harder once you realize what that history actually includes. This was plantation wealth. This was forced labor. This was a polished Southern image built on a system that never belonged in a postcard, even if that is how people first meet it now. And that is the twist with Vacherie. It does not unsettle you because it looks ruined. It unsettles you because it looks preserved. Almost too preserved, like the landscape got cleaned up, but the weight underneath it never really left. Even Oak Alley's own research now points visitors back toward the enslaved people tied to the property and the lives that existed behind the main house, which changes the whole mood once you know to look past the oak branches and the perfect lawn. That might be why Vacherie lingers with people. Some places are creepy because they are ugly, broken, or obviously haunted. Vacherie is worse in a quieter way. It is beautiful enough to pull you in, then honest enough to make that beauty feel complicated. And once a place does that, it is hard to relax there completely. Number 6. Chalmette. Chalmette is creepy for a reason that sneaks up on you. It is not some half-forgotten bayou town with a legend attached to it. It is a real place, just about 6 miles downriver from New Orleans, with around 21,500 people still living ordinary lives there. But sitting right inside that community is one of the heaviest pieces of ground in Louisiana. Chalmette Battlefield, the site of the 1815 Battle of New Orleans. And that is what gives the whole place its strange weight, because battlefields are different from haunted houses. A haunted house feels like it is trying to scare you. A battlefield does something quieter. It gives you too much space. Chalmette Battlefield is open, flat, and low to the horizon, with a reconstructed American rampart, the 100-foot Chalmette Monument, that 1830s house, and a national cemetery all sitting there in the same still landscape. Nothing about it jumps at you. That is the problem. It is too calm, too orderly, too silent for a place where so much violence once crashed into one small piece of land. And the history here is not small. This was the famous last great battle of the War of 1812, fought on January 8, 1815. The strange part is that the treaty ending the war had already been signed in Europe, but the news had not reached Louisiana in time. So men still marched, fired, bled, and died here while the war was technically already ending on paper. That little twist makes Chalmette feel even stranger. It is not just a battlefield. It is a battlefield built around delay, distance, and the terrifying idea that history can keep moving even after the world thinks it has stopped. And there is another layer most people miss. The land also carries the memory of Facendeville, a black community that once stood near the battlefield before being erased as the memorial landscape expanded. So even the ground here is not holding just one past. It is holding several, and not all of them were preserved the same way. Maybe that is what makes Chalmette so unsettling. It is not haunted by one ghost story. It feels haunted by memory itself, by what gets remembered, what gets buried, and how a place can look perfectly peaceful while still feeling like it never fully exhaled. Number 5. Ile de Jean, Charles' Isle de Jean. Charles is scary in a way that feels almost unfair because it is not a place that was ruined all at once. It is a place that has been disappearing slowly, year after year, until the loss itself became part of daily life. Down in Terrebonne Parish, about 75 to 80 miles south of New Orleans, this narrow island community sits at the end of a low, flood-prone road, with water pressing in from both sides. Even before you know the history, the place already feels fragile, like the map is holding its breath, and the numbers make it worse. Louisiana's own resettlement documents say the island once covered more than 22,000 acres. Now it is down to roughly 320. USGS says it has lost about 98% of its landmass since the 1950s. That is not just erosion, that is a place being rubbed out in public. What used to be a larger stretch of land with cypress and pasture has been reduced to a thin remnant above the water, the kind of landscape that makes you wonder how long a hometown can keep being called a hometown before nature changes the terms. But this story hits harder because Ile de Jean Charles was never just a patch of land. It has long been home to members of the Isle de Jean-Charles band of Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw, and for them the island is tied to family, memory, ancestors, fishing, healing, and the kind of identity that does not move easily just because a safer address exists somewhere else. That is the twist here. People often hear this story and imagine one dramatic climate disaster. The truth is more unsettling. The island has been worn down by decades of land loss, saltwater intrusion, subsidence, canals, levees, and storms, while families had to decide whether staying meant preserving home or simply waiting too long to leave. That is why the resettlement project matters so much. Louisiana launched a first-of-its-kind effort to help residents move to higher ground at the New Isle, about 40 miles inland, and by late 2024 dozens had resettled there. But even that does not feel like a clean ending, because the creepiest thing about Ile de Jean-Charles is not that it is gone. It is that it is still there, just smaller, quieter, and harder to hold on to every year. Some places are haunted by what happened in the past. This one feels haunted by the future. Number 4. Gibsland. Gibsland is creepy in a way that feels very American. Not because it is ruined, not because it is haunted, but because it is one of those tiny roadside towns that looks so ordinary. You would never guess history left something this dark on the shoulder of the highway. Up in Bienville Parish, with only about 770 people, Gibsland feels small even by small town standards. A few streets, a slow pace, the kind of place you could drive through in minutes and barely remember. And that is exactly why it sticks, because this is where Bonnie and Clyde's story ended. On May 23, 1934, the two most infamous outlaws in America were ambushed and killed on Highway 154 just south of town. Not in some giant city shootout, not in a dramatic canyon. On a rural Louisiana road near a place most people outside the state would never have known existed if that one morning had not happened there. That alone gives Gibsland its strange feeling. It is a town that seems too small for a story that big, and the town does not really let that story fade. That is the twist. Gibsland did not get swallowed by the legend. It learned how to live with it. Right on Main Street, inside the old Ma Canfield's Cafe, sits the Bonnie and Clyde Ambush Museum, the place tied to the pair's supposed last breakfast. A little farther out, only about 2.5 miles from town, is the ambush site itself, so the whole thing feels uncomfortably close together. A cup of coffee, a small town street, a short drive, and then the place where one of America's most mythologized crime stories ended in gunfire. That is what makes Gibsland more unsettling than people expect. It is not trying to scare you. It is too plain for that, too modest, too everyday. But that is exactly what gives it weight. Because once a town this small gets attached to something this violent, this famous, and this endlessly retold, the story starts to stain the landscape a little. Even the annual Bonnie and Clyde Festival adds to that strange feeling, turning an old ambush into local identity, almost like the town and the legend can no longer be separated. Some places are creepy because they look wrong. Gibsland is creepier because it looks normal. And then you realize, normal is where the story happened. Number 3. Minden does not feel creepy at first. Sitting in Webster Parish, about 28 miles east of Shreveport with roughly 12,000 people, it comes off like a normal small Louisiana city. The streets are lived in, the town has rhythm. Nothing about downtown screams danger, mystery, or anything you would put on a list like this. And that is exactly why Minden works so well here. Because the thing that makes it unsettling is not sitting right in the middle of town. It is waiting just outside of it. A short drive northeast of Minden takes you to Germantown Colony, and that is where the mood changes. This was not some random settlement that faded away. Germantown was a real religious communal colony founded in 1836, the earliest of its kind in Louisiana, built around the idea that a group of believers could step away from the world and live by a shared spiritual order. Property was communal, life was structured, work was collective. For a while, that vision was serious enough to build an entire little world around it. And now most of that world is gone. That is what makes the place feel strange. Not because it looks violent, not because it looks haunted in the usual sense, but because a few rough wooden buildings still remain, including Countess Leon's house and the old kitchen dining hall, and they do not feel like leftovers from a town. They feel like leftovers from a belief. The logs are hand-hewn, the structures are plain. The whole place has this stubborn, stripped-down look, like it was built by people who thought they were starting over from the ground up and did not need much from the outside world. And that is the twist with Minden. The creepiest part is not that something terrible happened there in one dramatic moment. It is that an entire shared dream slowly cooled off and collapsed into silence. Germantown lasted until 1871, and what survives now is just enough to make your imagination do the rest. You are not looking at ruins in the usual sense. You are looking at the shell of an idea that once felt strong enough to become daily life. Maybe that is why Minden lingers. Some places are eerie because of death, crime, or ghosts. This one feels eerie because time did not fully erase what people once believed could exist there. It just left a few rough buildings in the quiet and walked away. Number 2. Darrow is creepy in a way that almost feels impolite to say out loud, because on paper this place is beautiful. Sitting in Ascension Parish between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Darrow is tiny, only about 200 people, the kind of place that barely feels bigger than a landmark. And that landmark is Huma's house, one of the most polished, elegant estates in Louisiana. The house is grand. The gardens stretch for 38 acres. The whole property leans into beauty so hard that at first it feels like the exact opposite of scary. And that is where the trouble starts, because some places do not unsettle you by looking broken. They unsettle you by looking too perfect. Huma's house sells a certain dream of old Louisiana. Its own site talks about more than 250 years of history, layers of ownership, and a carefully restored estate that invites people to step into the world of plantation wealth. The paths are neat, the trees are trimmed, the mansion sits there with that calm, balanced look old Southern houses sometimes have, the kind that makes everything seem under control. But when a place is this quiet, this orderly, and this full of old memory, your brain starts doing something strange. It stops relaxing, it starts listening, and that is the twist with Darrow. Huma's house does not just lean into history, it also openly leans into mystery. The estate has its own page about unexplained experiences on the property, describing events that felt difficult to explain, one tied to nature and another described as something much more unnatural. That changes the whole mood, because now the place is not just elegant. It is elegant with a rumor attached, not a cheap haunted house rumor either, something softer, stranger. The kind of story that makes a beautiful room feel less comfortable just because you know other people have stood there and felt something they could not explain. And maybe that is what makes Darrow so effective. It is not creepy because it looks abandoned. It is creepy because it looks cared for, preserved, almost staged. Huma's house has even been used in films, which only adds to the sense that the place already feels halfway between history and performance. Some towns on this list scare you with ruins or tragedy. Darrow does something quieter. It shows you a mansion in open country wrapped in beauty, then lets one small crack appear in the mood. And once that crack is there, the whole place feels different. Number 1. Convent feels like the kind of place where history never really left. It just got quieter. Sitting in St. James Parish on the east bank of the Mississippi, roughly halfway between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Convent is tiny, only about 480 people. On paper, that sounds like the kind of place you could miss if you blinked, but the ground around it carries way more weight than its size suggests. This is River Parish's country, where the road runs past old plantation landscapes, church spires, fields, and houses that still look polished enough to pass for heritage postcards in the daylight. And that is exactly what makes Convent unsettling. It looks too calm for the kind of history it holds. Because Convent is not creepy in a loud way. It is creepy in a patient way. Places like this do not need broken windows or ghost stories to get under your skin. They already have something heavier. Around Convent, plantation tourism is still part of the landscape in St. Joseph Plantation is one of the clearest examples. It is a raised Creole house from around 1830, still part of a working sugarcane plantation, still open to visitors, and still showing original slave cabins and dependencies on the property. That changes the mood immediately. What starts off looking like architecture and old-world charm stops feeling simple the second you realize the past here is not tucked away in a museum case. It is still standing outside in the open. And that is the twist with Convent. The creepiest thing is not that this history is hidden, it is that it is still tourable, walkable, narrated, in some cases even told by descendant guides, which makes the whole experience feel less like a clean history lesson and more like a place where memory still has a pulse. St. Joseph even offers a morning tour focused on 19th century Creole mourning customs, and that detail says a lot. In daylight, this corridor can feel like preserved heritage. Change the angle just a little and it starts to feel like the old emotional weather never really cleared. Maybe that is why Convent deserves the top spot. Other places on this list are creepy because something happened there once. Convent is different. It feels like the land itself keeps telling on the past. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough to remind you that in parts of Louisiana, history is not behind you. It is still under your feet. What gets me about Louisiana is that its creepiest towns do not always try to scare you. Some pull you in with swamp legends. Some feel eerie because the road simply runs out. Others are beautiful, quiet, even charming, until you learn what the land has been holding onto all this time. And honestly, that is what makes this state feel different. In Louisiana, the fear is rarely loud. It sits in the water, in the trees, in old roads, in plantation walls, in abandoned dreams, and in places where history never really feels finished. For me, that is what makes these towns so unforgettable. They do not just look creepy, they feel like they remember more than they should. Now I want to hear from you. Which town on this list felt the creepiest to you, and which one would you actually visit if you had the chance? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy dark, atmospheric places with real stories behind them, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for the next countdown.